OG's case is based on the premise that you're actually able to get to the discussion table and get this corporation to cooperate with you. This is inherently unlikely for several reasons. First, as we already tell you, and as I already POI to them, that the reason why there are bad things being done by these corporations in the first place is because you have profit incentives to do so. For example, it is cheaper to maintain current patriarchal structures than it is to dismantle it and hire HR officers to revamp the corporate environment. It is cheaper to simply ruin an entire forest and sell the wood for profit than it is to preserve it because they lose out on profit that way. It is cheaper to continue selling oil than to completely revamp energy systems to renewable energy and have more energy and more profit that way. The point here being is because large corporations are beholden to shareholders, their profit incentive is most important because CEOs, the decision maker, and the board of trustees that are beholden to shareholders are only able to maintain their positions insofar as they are able to provide profits to shareholders on the ground. Why is this an important point? Because whatever profit incentives corporations or social movements are able to provide to corporations is minimal unless you threaten to pull your support. What does this mean? Because proposition themselves says that social movements are likely not to be very rich or affluent and not likely to have the billions of dollars needed that are able to move corporations to act. But what they do have is that they have lots of people. They have hundreds of thousands to millions of people that add up to billions of dollars in GDP when they buy these corporations. When you're able to accrue critical mass and you threaten to pull out from these corporations through boycotts, that is a large enough profit incentive for them to act. It is unclear how they get the same scale of threat to the profit incentive of corporations that push them to cooperate. So we think in the best case scenario of proposition, the cooperation that they get is very minimal. It's going to be things like, okay, maybe getting like minimal forms of saying, okay, maybe queer people are good, but no actual change happening in terms of hiring practices or protecting people within corporations, or not affecting like communities, or not focusing on gentrifying communities and displacing hundreds of thousands of people. And now, the point here then is that if you want these corporations to comply, the threat of opposition is the only way that you get them to follow your incentives and your demands to protect people on the ground. But then they also tell us that, okay, if you become a social justice warrior that is radical, then no one will want to follow you. One, I think opposition takes multiple different forms. It exists in a spectrum. Sure, there are going to be outliers that are radical, but we're even willing to take the hard flash and say we're willing to support this. Why is that? Because even radical protesters shift Overton's window. They normalize certain things. For example, if I'm a radical left-wing protester, then even if the public doesn't generally accept my actions, I make centrist left movements seem more reasonable in comparison. This looks like Luigi Mangione, for example, assassinating the CEO of an insurance company, making it seem more normalized to call out insurance companies when in the past this would have seemed nonsensical or radical. And this normalization of action is very important because in order to draw in critical mass, the critical mass that is necessary for structural long-term legislative change, you need you need centrist beliefs and normalized beliefs to hold true for your social movement to draw in more people. Because the more reasonable my ideas sound, the more people I will be able to draw in. This is the prerequisite and in fact the clear counterfactual coming from opening opposition of how we're able to get societal change absent large corporations. Because they tell us, okay, we only have figureheads and icons and martyrs on our end. But we tell you that's only a part of the picture. These icons and martyrs represent the hundreds of thousands of millions of people that follow behind them. These icons and martyrs are gathering posts and shining beacons to gather large amounts of people to actually influence democratic elections, for example, and elect politicians that are likely to favor policies that force these corporations to comply with the needs of the people. And I think this has happened time and time again in history. This looks like the first wave of feminism. This looks like whatever policies that Greta Thunberg was able to follow. It even looks like the majority independently organized pride parades that we see in status quo currently. So even if proposition wants to hit us on the lack of change that has happened in status quo, we argue that it's far worse on proposition when there is no clear incentive for these corporations to act. And on that note, I'll take a POI from closing. 5,
Specifically because boycotts are very hard, as in you have to divest from companies that you use every day. I think that's the reason why not many people do them, so the incentive for the company to change is very small.
Okay, if we're going to argue about the feasibility of boycotting, it's not even that hard when you consider that a majority of corporations do have competitors or alternatives. If I choose to boycott Starbucks, then I can choose to buy my coffee from Coffee Bean. If I choose to boycott a certain mall, I can just go to different malls that are also in the area. It is very unusual to have long-term or sustained boycotts against an entire group of companies simultaneously. But even assuming that is the case, the degree to which you boycott is also variable. It is not that I have to completely give up on buying sales or buying coffee at all. If I reduce my coffee consumption from daily to weekly or monthly, that still means 7 to 30x decrease in profits for these corporations. So even minor changes like this, when scaled up, lead to large systemic changes. But then lastly, on this case coming from proposition where they say, oh, you need money in order to influence social change. Well, this is actually untrue because of internet and social media has democratized access to power. This means that icons and figureheads and martyrs are able to get tens of millions to hundreds of millions of views online and are able to actually gather and cohere and accumulate power and people into social movements that are able to become actual forces to be reckoned with. And these are things that don't even necessarily require money because it is free to post videos. And just a few people posting enough videos, creating enough engagement is enough to create movements that are able to influence social change. So we tell you that cooperating with large corporations is thus more harm than good when you have to give up on certain things. For example, if Greta Thunberg has to sign a contract with oil companies saying that, oh, they're actually green and they're using oil less now, guys, that gives her less opportunity to call out and become a whistleblower for the things that are going on behind the scenes and make it harder for the large amount of social capital she has acquired to call out and force these oil companies to actually implement systemic change. It ties these social movements' hands behind their backs and makes it harder for them to protect people on the ground. So I think it's very important that we prove to you that this amount of social change can occur absent large corporations. And in fact, large corporations hinder us from using that social capital. I think this is logically prerequisite to anything that closing will be able to run. And for that reason, I think it's a clear OO win at this point. Thank you.